Hi, everyone. It's Virginia Stanley, joined by my counterpart, Lainey Mays. Hi, Lainey.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome, welcome. We're so glad that you're here with us today. We have a really interesting hour with two really interesting authors. Let's bring them on right now. Taylor Moore and Brad Taylor. We're calling this the Day of the Taylors.
Hi.
Hello.
How you doing? Thanks for having us.
Thank you for joining us. We're so excited to have you both here today. Look, they say write what you know, and you gentlemen certainly are the epitome of that. We have Brad Taylor, retired lieutenant colonel, 21-year veteran of the U.S. Army Infantry and Special Forces. And he's going to be talking today about his book, Devil's Ransom, which was on sale in January. And we have Taylor Moore, who worked as a CIA intelligence officer and a consultant for the Department of Defense. His book, FLASHPOINT, is going on sale in August. So we cannot wait to dive into conversation with both of you about your books. But first, before we do that, we just wanted to have a little informal chat.
Yeah,
So
sure.
welcome.
Taylor, it's good to see you.
Good to see you, Brad. I missed you in Minneapolis. What happened? Were you on a deadline or research?
No, I was actually in Croatia doing book research.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, there you go. I guess you have a good excuse. I guess we'll let that slide for missing voucher
I saw
con.
the Facebook pictures and the tweets and all that kind of stuff, but I was out of the country, so I couldn't.
Well, we trashed you good while you were gone.
Sure,
so just so you know.
So how long have you men known each other?
It's been what, 5 years now, maybe?
Yeah, so I met Brad at the first Thriller Fest that I ever went to, and I was always joking. I said I never can get access to Brad because he's too popular. He's always mobbed by people. But I know Elaine, his wife, very well because we get to hang out when he's got his people around him and everything. But no, yeah, about 5 years ago, I guess.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, you've both been so supportive. Of libraries. I mean, Taylor, we were together at the Texas Library Association. I don't know. Was that last year?
I think that was last year. Yeah. That was fun. I like that. It was kind of the first return to some normalcy after COVID, where people were back out again and en masse, and that was fun. I think we're all kind of celebrating.
Yeah, I think we had a panel with Mateo, who wrote Black Buck. And it was funny because you were talking at the booth because you did a signing together. And then at the panel, like live, you said something about the CIA. And he's like, I've been talking to you and I had no idea about this backstory. It was very funny. But that's
what makes you a good officer if nobody knows, that's part of it.
Yeah, you had some good stories, but that was a great panel too.
That was fun. He was fun. And I can't remember the other author. We had someone else with us and she was great.
Sarah Pinner, I believe.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. She was fun.
Yeah, that was great. And Brad, you were just at the Library Journal's Day of Dialogue, and that was really cool. So, we really appreciate the support that you've both shown for libraries then and now, taking time to talk with us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Anytime.
Okay, we'll be back tomorrow. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to put Brad Taylor in the green room. And goodbye, Brad. And we're going to talk to Taylor. And then Taylor will go in the green room. We'll talk to Brad. And then you both come back at the end and, do a newlywed game goodbye kiss. One of those. Which seems kind of crazy. So here are the jackets. Taylor, cool-o. And FLASHPOINT, Taylor, cool-o. Okay, so Brad is going to be watching from an undisclosed location.
Just gonna say that.
Really?
Yes.
All right. Lainey, take it away.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Taylor, for being here with us. I have a bio, so sit tight while I talk about you for a minute. Taylor Moore is the author of Downrange, which was nominated for the Barry Award for Best First Novel, named a Strand Magazine Best Mystery of 2021, and selected for the Texas Library Association's Lariat Reading List, which is you were on that panel we were just talking about. You're a sixth-generation Texan who grew up on a farm and ranch northwest of Houston, and a former CIA intelligence officer who worked in both analysis and operations, and later consulted for the Department of Defense in theater security cooperation, force protection, and counter narcotics. You now live in the Texas Panhandle with your wife and children, and full-time author, screenwriter, speaker, and this is your third Garrett Kohl novel, Flashpoint, and the second, Firestorm, is up there. Of course, Downrange was the first, so Booklist called it a series worth watching, and we definitely are. So welcome, and tell us about the new book.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm really excited about the new book. For those of you who follow the series, I always sort of it's a Wild West, a lot of action, a lot of adventure, a lot of family, and a lot of heart. It's a really fun combination of books. But everybody knows, if you've read the series, that I sort of wrap everything up at the end, but I always leave just a little bit hanging for the readers, leaving them want a little bit more. And so for those of you who read Firestorm, you'll know that I sort of wrapped up most of what happened in the book, but I left some stuff hanging. And what was hanging was that the people that came after Garrett's family, there's a few of them that are still out there, and they sort of dispersed into the world and are trying to hide. But Garrett has teamed up with his partners at the CIA, and they're hunting these guys down. And so the book starts off really fun. I had a lot of fun writing this part. I had a former SEAL that helped me sort of, we wrote the first chapter like we were planning an operation. So it starts off with a bang, and it's a lot of fun. But we sort of begin with that, and then we bring it immediately back to Texas, on the Texas High Plains, to Garrett's ranch, and he's got to get home. He's sort of, of course, this is book 3, and some things have happened since then, and he just wants to be a family man. He's got a newly adopted son he's in love with. He's got a ranch that he's invested heavily into. He's got things to do. Of course, if you read Firestorm, you'll know that the ranch was pretty much burned down at the end of the book. And so this has left him with this sort of soul crushing debt that he is sort of doesn't know what to do about. He's got to figure out how to make this work. And so he's got, while, he gets some problems off his plate, he's got a whole lot more when he gets home. So he's dealing with all that and sort of processing this and processing being a new dad when he's approached by this guy who needs help. And Garrett, again, he just wants to be left alone at this point, to get out of this sort of action adventure world that he's in as a former DEA agent, or as a current DEA agent. He's trying to get out of it, but he can't not help. There's this guy working at he's an engineer at a nuclear weapon. It's based on a real place here in the Panhandle called Pantex, and it's the only assembly and disassembly nuclear weapons facility in the United States, and it's located right here. And it's actually very close to Garrett's ranch in the series. And so this guy approaches Garrett and basically says he needs help because he's being blackmailed by this Iranian guy. Doesn't know anything beyond that, but they're holding something over him. And so Garrett, again, just sort of wants to be left alone, but, he can't let this thing go. He says, well, I'll kind of help out, and I'll get you, to the right people at the CIA that he knows. And so he does this, and then almost immediately, and I don't like spoilers, so I'm going to kind of just tee it up there. And I will just tell you that that something very, very personal happens to him. And at this point, he cannot let it go. And he is roped in, like you can't imagine. And so he's into this now. And so and pretty soon, what he thinks is just sort of your standard espionage kind of deal, where these guys are looking for classified information, turns into a hijacking. Basically, this team of Quds Force operatives take over a train with nuclear weapons on it. And there's a whole side story with an assassination attempt that's possibly underway with a high-ranking U.S. official. There's a lot more than anybody had anticipated. So it sort of cranks up really fast. And again, if you read the series, you'll kind of know how my books are. They sort of get to a point, and then boom, they take off. And that's how this one is too. So it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of excitement, action, adventure, but there's also a lot of heart to this book. Again, if you've read this series, you'll know it's more than just a shoot 'em up. it's about family. It's about my protagonist becoming a new father. It's about love. It's about family. There's family drama, and of course there's the comic relief with characters like Butch and Smitty. For people that know the series, everybody loves those guys. So there's a lot in this series. It's a lot of fun, and I think for readers that like book 1 and book 2, you're going to love book 3.
That's great. I love that. We're all very excited. I really like what you said about like not giving too many spoilers, because really the thrill is in the read, so that sets it up perfectly. And I also enjoy what you just said about, you know, what you can expect, what people will find, because if you're new to the series, or if you're a librarian at the reference desk, that's really important to be able to hand the book over. So thank you for hitting those points too. So I'm intrigued to know more about the career change. So where did writing come from? What was the idea? Like, why have you just always wanted to write a book? And maybe, you know, I don't know how you got to this point.
You know, I wrote the first book that I ever wrote. I was ranching with my dad, and I think that was in the year 2000, I believe. And really writing that book was kind of a bucket list kind of a thing, or, you know, like somebody says, I want to run a marathon, and I don't really want to be a marathon runner. I just want to do it and say I did it. And that was kind of me with writing a book. So I think I wrote my first book in 2000, and never really had plans to do anything. I just checked it off the list, and I did write a little bit here and there. But, you know, when I was working in the intelligence world, I was writing so much, I was so busy and so exhausted that I just didn't have time, and I just didn't have the energy. But when I got out of the intel world, I was working in oil and gas up here in the Texas High Plains. I got inspired, and I started writing again, and it really, again, with no other reason, just because I enjoyed writing. I enjoy the craft. I enjoy telling stories, and so that's kind of how it started. And so I was so inspired by this place, and so anyhow, so that's kind of how I started writing again, and was encouraged by some writers. And there's a strong writers community. Jody Thomas, Linda Brode, John R. Erickson. So any librarians out there, and especially in Texas, will probably know some of these names. But these people became mentors and friends, and people that encouraged me to start writing. And so that really got me into doing this full time.
Wow. Yeah. And I mean, the character has been everywhere. So I guess you could have technically said it anywhere, but Texas is such a big sense of place in all of the books. Is that, I mean, like, I don't know if you want to talk about that, but the sense of place is so big.
I think, yeah, I would like to talk about that, because, you know, I'm a Texan. I'm from Texas, but I'm from Central Texas, and I grew up, you know, on a farm and ranch and all that. But it was a very different experience than what I, you know, then coming up to the High Plains, the Texas Panhandle, the Llano Estacado is a totally different. It was a surreal feeling being up here, even as a Texan, because it's so broad, it's so massive, it's so lonely, it's so expansive and beautiful, and it's haunting. It's. I mean, even again, sort of having grown up with that lifestyle, that I could sort of write into the story. The High Plains was just different. It was just different. It felt very isolated and interesting. And I sort of got to experience that doing oil and gas work, because I was out on these gigantic ranches, and I started meeting just the most interesting and fascinating people. And so those became characters in my stories, and the place just came alive for me. And that's one of the greatest compliments I get from readers, is that people will write to me and say, I love the description. Like, you know, I feel like I was in the story. And so I try to paint, I really try to do a good job of painting what it's like to be in a place that's so isolated, so beautiful, and so deadly. And it's one of those places that you really, it can kill you. I mean, you can be out, you know, caught out in the cold here, and you can get lost. I mean, there's all these things that can happen. There's rattlesnakes, there's, you know, tornadoes, there's all the, it's, you know, basically a place that's trying to kick you out of it, you know, but people have made a home here. And the people like my protagonist and his family, they're hard people, you know, they've been through it all. And so I call it world building. I mean, it's a world that exists. I didn't invent it, but I think for a lot of readers out there, even for me being a Texan, seeing what this High Plains is like is just a totally different experience. So I enjoy sort of showing people through the books what it's like to be here.
Yeah, I can imagine kind of how haunting barren land could be, and like kind of menacing too.
It is, and it's scary. It's got its own. There's parts that are just completely barren, and I write about the Cap Rock, which is this like large sort of plateau. It's hard to explain, but I always jokingly say, I said, you get up on top of it, and it's so flat beyond, you feel like you could see the curvature of the earth. Of course, you can't, but you're almost looking on the horizon to see if you could see it, because you can literally see as far as the eye can see, and it's just it messes with your mind, but in a kind of a cool way.
We have a question from Nicole. Lainey, you didn't ask this yet, did you, from Nicole?
No.
We're just gonna chime in and spitball this, but she wants to know if you use an outline or do you just write? What's your process?
Man, I always mean to use an outline. every next book I'm gonna use. Every next book is, this time I'm going to get serious about it. I'm going to really do I'm going to do this by the book, and this time, so I'm writing book 4 right now, and I'm kind of doing an outline. Sometimes I'll just put, this time I thought, there's save the cat. There's all these different things you can kind of do. So I sort of ballpark it, and, I'll kind of look at those and kind of get a basic, idea of the structure that I want to do. And I'll outline. My outlines they're pretty rough, So I guess I do outline. I'll kind of just have ideas just in a row, and I think, okay, this is kind of how I want the story to go. Then I'll sort of make it look a little bit prettier. Then what I'll do is I'll just get, I set up the book that I'm going to use, the template, and I'll say chapter, and then I'll go part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4. And I just start filling in chapters, and I kind of know how to break it from there. But I always want this to be a more technical process than it turns into. But it's really sort of, it's kind of, it's just a free for all when it's all said and done.
That sounds like an outline to me.
I guess it is an outline. I don't know. Some people have these really, computer programs and things they do, and it's just, if anybody ever tried to follow my outline, I don't think they could follow it. I think it only makes sense in my mind. So.
You know what? We've talked to so many different authors, and everybody's got a different way. I don't think there's a right way or a wrong way. I think the way that works for you is what you should stick with. I should do this, I should do that. You don't need to, because your books are, they're circulating, people are loving them. And if that's your relationship with how you get the story across, then you've won.
And I think that's important to remember. And I tell people all the time, well, and I'll say I'm not a super artsy kind of guy, but there's the one thing that I'm a bit artsy on. I say there is a magic that happens on the page, because people say, well, how do people always want to know, how do you write a book? How do you write a scene? I say, I don't really know. I just open it up, and the characters, I say, I'm going to have these 2 characters. They're going to be in a room. Something's going to happen. Let's see what happens. And I know people say that's strange. I'm like, I know it's strange, but I'm just telling you, that's what happens. I sit down and I start writing a sentence, and it all just, a world happens and it unfolds. It's the only sort of part that I would really say is magic, but there's kind of a magic to it.
It's so funny that you say that. There are so many authors who have said the same thing. Sometimes they say that the characters speak to them, that they don't know. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they have an idea, and then it takes them in a different direction. And I always find that fascinating. It's just, as I said before, it's just sort of, how it strikes you, and then more importantly, how you relay that story.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's weird. And again, I remember one time when I was first starting, maybe my agent suggested that I do something. And I'm not one of these people, if an editor says something, as long as it's within reason, it doesn't, I think, okay, this is a good idea. Let's go this direction. But there was one thing I couldn't do. There was a character, well, I'll just, I don't want to give away if anybody, but there was a character that was just going to get shot. It was just going to happen. No matter how much somebody didn't want it to happen, that person was going to get shot. And I don't know how to describe it. It wouldn't have felt right continuing through the story unless that happened to that person. And I can't explain it to you. It's just something in the brain or in the soul that comes together, and you just kind of, that's how stories come together. I don't know. It's weird.
Wow. That's heavy.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess so.
Wow.
I guess so.
We have a question about endings, speaking of what's coming next. So
Yeah.
Jennifer said, you said you leave loose ends in each book. Do you know how they will be resolved in the next novel? Or do you have an idea how you want the ending of the next novel to be pleasantly surprised each time? How do you?
Yeah, so that's a great question because, you know, endings, and somebody wrote on one of my reviews one time, they said that it was for book 2, and they said that you wrote a great ending and that's hard to do. And I think it is. I mean, how many times have we gotten to the end of a book or a movie and you're like, really? You know, like you might have enjoyed it the whole way and then you get to the end and you're disappointed. It leaves this horrible taste in your mouth, you know? And I never wanted to do that to people. And I never wanted to leave such a, you know, a cliffhanger there where you feel ripped off. And that happens, you know, sometimes you go, oh, really? So now I got to buy the next book to see, you know, if they get killed or not. So I believe in life, you know, these books, you know, John Erickson, you know, the writer does Hank the Cowdog. He always says, you know, these stories are nourishment for the soul. And so for me, I kind of feel the same way. You know, everybody has enough trouble in life. There's enough problems out there in the world without me creating more. So yeah, I'm gonna put you through the ringer when you're reading the book, but I'm gonna tie it up in the end, and I'm not gonna leave you hanging. And so for me, the things that I do leave hanging, I sort of wrap up the immediate, like you know that everyone's safe or everyone isn't safe. I'm not gonna leave you there, but there's gonna be always a little nugget. We're gonna go, well, now what are they gonna do? Well, now what's gonna happen? Well, that's good for this moment, but what about 6 months from now? That, you know what I mean? So that's kind of what I want. And so my books typically are falling, I think, 9 months after the next one. So as readers are going through, you're going through these people's lives. You're literally watching the kid grow up, and you're watching Garrett and Lacey fall further into love or have problems or whatever it is. And so to me, that's fun. I think people can become a part of their lives and really get into it. But I think when it comes to endings, there has to be some resolution, at least on my end. That's what I like. That's what I like to read. I just hate something that's too loose and just leaves you unfulfilled.
Yeah, there's definitely an art to episodic or series writing, because you don't want to paint yourself into a corner to end too many things, but you want people to be fulfilled, like you said.
Yeah. And I kind of know to sort of add on to that, the question was, you know, do you know? I kind of know. I'm planning the series out, you know, so in my head, I know what's going to be in the next book. Maybe not 100%, but I know where I want the series to go, and I know what I want the characters to do and how I want them to grow or maybe fail. You know, I mean, so they're going to have their ups and they're going to have their downs, but I kind of know, so I plan it accordingly.
You had such a wonderful response when you spoke at the Texas Library Association. I mean, you know, but the fact that the conference was a state library show. This series is so far reaching, and your characters are so fully fleshed out, even the ones that you got to kill off. But I loved the response from librarians, and I love the ease with which you spoke, as you are now, with about your books and to the librarians. And it was like one of those nights. You know, we've been to a lot of these events, but that stands out as one of those really great. It felt very connected. Do you know? I just felt like everybody was, I don't know. They just felt connected to everything that you were saying. And it was a really wonderful evening. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. We have a question from Maureen Roberts in Baltimore. And she says, I see a guitar in the background. Are you a musician too? And how does music influence your writing?
So the guitar is a funny thing. So so I used to play the guitar, and then, you know, kids happen and life happens. And so the guitar was in the closet or something. Now, when I became a full-fledged writer, I said, you know what is going to be great? I'm going to sit and I'm going to write my books, and I'm going to pull out the guitar and I'm going to take a break and play songs. I've never done that once, ever. So it was really these great intentions of how much free time I was going to have as a writer that I never have, you know. So real writers will tell you, yeah, you have all these grand ideas of what you're going to do with your extra time. There is no extra time. So no, the music, yeah. So I'd love to say that I pull it out, and it's just been sitting in the corner. I think I hang a hat on it every now and then or something. That's the greatest use. Music is an important part of it though for me. And in fact, if you follow me on social media, for every book, I do a playlist, and it's Garrett Kohl's playlist. And I call it his playlist, and it's mostly Texas country, like usually things that you're not going to find everywhere. But if you're a music person, I would encourage you to go into my Instagram, and you can see the list, or if you're on Spotify, just put in Downrange or Firestorm. I'm very proud of those lists because that's music that I listen to, that I love, that has inspired scenes in the books. And I just have a blast. Almost as much fun writing is finding songs that I think either Garrett would listen to. And I call it his playlist, and somebody called me out on it one time. They go, "Would Garrett really listen to this?" And I said, "Probably not." But I said, I could. There was a part of Firestorm, and in my mind, every time that scene plays out in my head, I can hear that song in the background. And sometimes before I write, I will play a song, and I'll just get in the moment to write that scene. So yeah, it's an incredibly important part of the writing process for me, at least.
I have an image from the last book playlist. I'm putting it in here, and people can go follow you on Instagram.
Okay, good.
That's awesome. That's awesome, Taylor. I love a playlist. Wanda Morris, who's a wonderful writer who we publish, she made her playlist. She made a playlist, and man, when they are selected, when an author cultivates that kind of a list that really evokes such feeling when you're reading the book. And so for somebody to say, would your character really listen to that? Maybe not, as you say, but it isn't probably just what they would listen to. It's the feeling that envelops you when you're reading the book. I love that. So Lainey, cool. You put that in there. That's awesome. Thank you for mentioning that, Taylor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's see. I don't know if we have more. Lots of people from all over the place. I don't know that we have many questions, just lots of love, and people from Omaha, and librarians, you are also wonderful.
Can I add something? Unless you have an immediate question.
Go for
I
it.
was going to say, because you mentioned librarians, and something popped into my head that's been surprising about this book series. I was first surprised that I've had more female. Of course, I'm former CIA and military intelligence. So I thought I was writing these books that were really, they've got the bullets and bombs and everything. But I've been surprised. Most of the response that I get are from female readers, and I do a lot of book clubs. And if I can't make them to their personally, if I'm not around the area, then I'll do a lot of virtual book clubs. But that's been surprising. But the other thing is I've been invited to be part of what they call a reluctant readers program, and it's something I'd never even heard of. But a school is having me come up to speak, and they're having me. Because the kid, like teenagers, high school kids are loving these books. And even my sister-in-law recently has been she's been getting pictures from other teachers of kids sitting there reading, Firestorm or Downrange. So I guess it's taken off with, with high school kids. And so I kind of just throw that out there. If you, for librarians or whoever, if you do know people that are reluctant readers or people that don't like books, these are great books for people that don't like books. So I just thought I would add that, and just as a little extra, a little aside.
I love that.
Love that. And that kind of goes back to the very beginning. What is it that you want librarians to relay to their patrons, outside the box here? Yes, military thriller, but so much more going on. And thank you for saying that, because a lot of times that is a subjective thing. And is this good for kids? YA, high school? Maybe. Sometimes we're like, well, there's some stuff in there. I don't know if they would like that, or and so that stuff you teachers or parents need to check it out, not to censor or ban, but to use discretion and judgment. But I love that you have sort of cut through that, and I thank you very much for saying that.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are moving right along, and somebody asked, "Oh, Lainey, we have another question for you. We can't say we're going to bring you back at the end after we talk to Brad, but there's one really good question here. Lainey, why don't you ask that?"
Yeah. So Sylvia asked, "What's your earliest library memory?"
Oh gosh, I remember going to the library in 4th or 5th grade, and Miss Dunlap, she to the, I mean, she's passed away now, but I mean, even later in life, she would always tell the stories about me wanting books about monster trucks and tractor pulls, and she thought that was the funniest thing, that I was so disappointed that she didn't have anything on monster trucks. And so I guess, you know, I think maybe she ordered one for me. I can't even remember, but you know, I was a boy through and through, and grew up on, you know, like I said, farm and ranch. So that was the kind of things that I thought were so cool. And but anyhow, that's just a funny memory that pops up, because I knew her, of course, later in life, and she just, I always thought that was so funny that she had this beautiful library but no books on monster trucks. So I think she took care of that.
Well, that she bought you some too. That's
I think so. I think so.
Well, this has been great. Please stick around. Go to the green room. Have some oysters or some M&Ms. I don't know. Or
Yeah,
just turn your
whatever you have. There you go.
play a song.
Yeah.
And then we'll bring you back after we speak with Brad for a bit. Then we'll bring you both back, and then we'll say goodbye to folks and give you a little heads up on what's happening next week. So
Sounds good. This was
Thank
fun. I
you.
appreciate it.
thanks, Taylor. We'll see you in a little bit.
See you in a sec.
I love that
Thanks.
library story.
Oh my God, that's the
Okay.
best.
So great. Okay, I'm bringing Brad back on.
And now we're bringing Brad Taylor.
Dun, da, da.
Dun, 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 dun.
Right there.
Oh my God, that's the best.
So great. Okay, I'm bringing Brad back on. We'll
Am I
just
up?
have to close out of that
Brad.
other.
Brad Taylor.
Dun, da, da.
Dun, 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 dun.
Right there.
Oh my God, that's the best.
So great. Brad, can you just close out of the other?
Brad Taylor.
Dun, da, da.
Hey.
Perfect.
How's that?
Only listen to us for so long. Hi, Brad.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. How are you? Were you able to watch?
I did. I apparently had to close it out because it was double dipping.
That's okay. Thank you so much for sticking around here and for joining us
Yeah, my pleasure.
to talk about your forthcoming book, The Devil's Ransom. So, Brad, let me do my deep dive into your bio, and then we'll get going. So, Brad, you're a retired lieutenant colonel, 21-year veteran of the U.S. Army Infantry and Special Forces, including 8 years with the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment, Delta, popularly known as Delta Force. You retired in 2010 after serving more than 2 decades and participating in Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom, as well as classified operations around the globe. Your final military post was as Assistant Professor of Military Science at the Citadel. You have written 16 New York Times bestsellers, and you're a security consultant on asymmetric threats for various agencies. I will pretend to know what that means, but in actuality, I don't. But I am thrilled to have you here. I'm the asymmetric parts, the other parts I get. So your new book, The Devil's Ransom, is your 17th, correct? Pike Logan.
Yeah, that's true. Yep.
Um,
Nobody's more surprised than me.
Well, first of all, your first book, which you published in 2011, that was the debut title, novel. It was One Rough Man, and that was an immediate success that launched the Pike Logan series. And then, as I say, the 15 following books all have been New York Times bestsellers. The raves are everywhere and have been for years. The Providence Journal says, once deemed the heir apparent to W.E.B. Griffin, Taylor is now laying claim to being the American John le Carré. Charleston Post and Courier says it is Taylor's remarkable character work with a robust and memorable cast that is the true strength of the novel. I want to talk to you about Pike Logan. I want you to talk about what started you down this road. I know when we talked to you, you were a guest on Library Journal's Day of Dialogue, and that was one of the questions that came up. And so I thought it was very interesting what you had to say about the first book.
Yeah, actually, the very first book when I first started writing, it's kind of like Taylor just got through saying. I was teaching at the Citadel. I left a special mission unit at Fort Bragg where I was deployed constantly. The only reason I came down to the Citadel to teach was literally just to have a break. And it was like getting off a bullet train and walking. I had more time on my hands than I knew what to do with. And I've always been a voracious reader. I've read. And in the back of my head, I always said, you know, one of these days I'm going to write a book. And so then I set out to write a book. I had a ton of time on my hands. I mean, I really did. Teaching was rewarding, but it wasn't near the deployment schedule I had with a special mission unit. And so I wrote One Rough Man. And you write, I wanted to write a story of redemption. That's what I wanted to write. That's what I wanted to write. But you Google, how do you write a book? And it says, write what you know. And I was a counter-terrorist commando, so that's what Pike became. But if I'd have been a cop, Pike would have been a police officer. If I'd have been a priest, Jennifer would have been a nun. The story would have been the same. It still would have been a story of redemption, but it was just based on. I didn't set out to write a military thriller. I set out to write a story of redemption, and that's what I did.
Well, your books have resonated with readers and writers, and your experience informs your books. When you talk about your research, you'd said that and I'm sort of paraphrasing, but I think you said that you sort of go in with about 50% in your head of what you know, and then the rest of it sort of reveals itself to you during your research. Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, sure. So if I can get on the ground for any of the books, if I can literally get my boots on the ground, we used to have a saying in the military, sight, sound, smells of the battlefield before you went on patrol. You wanted to know, I mean, when you left the wire in Iraq, if the dog that's always there on the corner is no longer there, that's an indicator of something. There's something going on. And so you wanted to get a feel for the environment everywhere you were. Well, that's the same way in writing a book. So when there's only so much you can do in Google Earth. So if I can get to, for instance, a widow strike, I think I went to Macau, Singapore, Thailand, and Hong Kong. All of those have different cultures. All of those have different food, different spices, different smells, different everything, which I will do a deep dive on the research for those places. But then when I get there, something's going to find me that I don't know about. For instance, for the Devil's Ransom, we were running around Croatia just recently, and my neighbor's from Bosnia-Herzegovina. And she said, you've got to get some mussels at this place called Molly Stone. It's the best restaurant ever. It's this little small town. And so we were leaving Korčula, which is one of the places I was going to go to. But my wife, Elaine, said, we've got to stop by this restaurant and get some mussels at Molly Stone. Well, we hit Molly Stone, and it's actually two towns, one Stone and S-T-O-N. The other one's Molly Stone, which means small stone. And they're connected by this fortified wall that goes all the way around. So apparently the largest wall fortification outside the Great Wall of China, and it's still there. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, holy moly, I can use that in a book. I know exactly how I'm going to use that. It's going to be a surveillance break. They'll get him on the wall. Some car will meet him at the end. Pike won't have a car. He's going to be on the wall and he's going to lose him. And I didn't know that thing existed. But if I hadn't been in the country, I never would have seen it. The other thing for Devil's Ransom is apparently they filmed all of Game of Thrones all over Croatia. You can't go anywhere in Croatia without some Game of Thrones reference. So I started putting those references in. Every time I went somewhere, it's like, oh, those are the shame stairs. And I was like, shame stairs? Why do you call this? Is Dubrovnik, Old Town Dubrovnik. Why do you call them the shame stairs? Well, the girl was naked and they bloodied her and made her walk down the stairs naked. And I was like, I didn't see Game of Thrones, but I'll take your word for it. So, everywhere I went, Cliff Fortress, which is outside of Split, was where they filmed all of the dragon areas. In fact, where she keep her dragons is underneath Split itself, the old town of Split. So you go underneath there, and it's from ancient times, it's a real place. But now it's a big Game of Thrones thing. Like Game of Thrones kept the dragons here. And so I never would have known that if I hadn't got on the ground and started walking around.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, it actually works out well when you hit something that, like Korčula, for instance, is the home of Marco Polo. Apparently he's from Korčula. Legend has it. I did a lot of research on this and nobody can actually prove he was, but legend has it he's from Korčula and his house is there. And so we went to the house and looked at it, and I'm like, that's making the book. You know, in the book, of course, it says, it's kind of legend has it that Marco Polo was here, but there's a gunfight right there in the house because it's got balconies and things that I could use for the book.
Oh my God, that's amazing. And you said that you don't go anywhere without your leather bound notebook and you're jotting constantly. Is that right?
Oh yeah, as a matter of fact, I have it right here.
Do you? Let's see it.
I never go anywhere without it. So this is, I just finished a short story because everybody's batched me up for a short story. Pike's now married. So the short story is about their honeymoon, which is art heist. It's not a military. I mean, it is a military thriller because everybody, you know, that's you got to write what you know. But it's about an art heist, and Pike's breaking up an art heist. He doesn't know he's breaking an art heist up, but he ends up breaking up an art heist without even knowing it. And that's basically what this stuff is. In fact, you can see Da Vinci. There's all kinds of little notes in here when I started doing the research. And that all came about because I saw a TV show on the greatest art heist ever, where the largest art heist, $400 million worth of art was stolen. It's never been recovered. Happened in 1990. You can see it on Netflix. And it fascinated me. So I was like, that's a germ of an idea. And we were in Positano, Italy, doing research for something else. And I was like, I'm going to use Positano, Italy, and I'm going to write about an art heist. That's what came about.
I love it. I love the way your mind works.
All these nuggets of like history in there. I'm like, I want to go there. I want to, and you kind of can. I mean, you can armchair travel. It's great.
Actually, you know, and I try to do that in every single book. Every single book I've written has some piece of history in there that's real history that I can then turn into fake history, for lack of a better term. So that art heist really did happen. And there's a church they're doing an excavation for that really is there. And all the Positano scenes are there. If you Google something in my book, you're going to find it. You can Google anything in my books and you will see what I'm talking about. And there's always enough history in the world that for instance, the Devil's Ransom I just finished. And we talked about this earlier at the library conference, that people asked me, you know, I've been to Afghanistan, been to Iraq, that kind of thing. And they said, are you going to, you know, write about Afghanistan? I said, no, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. Not doing it. And then I read a story about this thing called the Bactrian treasure, which is a real thing. So the Soviet archaeologists back in 1978, when the Soviets owned Afghanistan, found almost $1 billion worth of gold from all over the Silk Road. So they had stuff from Persia, they had stuff from China, and it was a really neat find because how did all this stuff end up in Afghanistan? It's a worldwide thing and it's all in Afghanistan. And then the Soviets left and Taliban took over and the treasure disappeared completely. And everybody thought the Soviets had melted it down or stolen it, and nobody really paid any attention to it. Well, then after 2011, after I went into Afghanistan and we toppled the Taliban, this old guy came out and said, hey, I got to tell you guys, I hid the treasure. There were 5 guys with keys, just like a mystery novel. So 5 guys had the keys to where this treasure was hidden underneath the central bank in the ground. And they pulled the treasure out. And it was put in a presidential palace. Everybody knew about it. I actually did a worldwide tour. You can Google it. National Geographic talked about it, going to China and San Francisco and everywhere else. Well, then the Taliban took over again, just recently, and the treasure disappeared again. And I was like, I can use that in a story. So that's what I did.
I think you need that like on a bookmark. Like I can use that in a story. I like that.
Yeah, I actually see that all the time. When you're just walking around, you see something. There was a thing in, I was doing Ghosts of War, I think it was. I was in Poland, and there's this guy named Jack Strong, which I'm sure Taylor knows all about because he's a CIA guy. So Jack Strong ended up helping us out in the Cold War more than anybody else. He was a Polish agent that was feeding us information about the Soviets. I'd never heard of him. Well, I'm running around Poland looking at various things, and there's this plaque to him. Here's a plaque for Jack Strong. This is where his office was. He's buried right here. And I was like, holy moly, I never heard of that guy. I can use him in a story. And so I did.
And you had said, I think when you started, you didn't, it was when all of this information became available in the ransomware and all of that, you just tied all of this together.
Yeah, actually, we talked about this a little bit before. When I first, you're always looking for ideas. I still do security consulting, so I still get feeds every morning on threats around the world. And, you know, a lot of times I'm told that I'm prescient and I predicted the future, but the truth of the matter is, it just doesn't make the American press. And most of the things that happen in national security are slow builds. They take a long time to mature. And I see something and I say, well, I can make that in a story. Well, by the time the book comes out, now it is a story in American press. I'm like, wow, how do you know about this? Well, for instance, I use Boko Haram in, not the Insider Threat, Ring of Fire. Boko Haram was the bad guy. Well, nobody had ever heard of Boko Haram. It's a terrorist group in Nigeria. The book comes out and then they kidnap the 40 girls. Everybody's tweeting about them.
Right.
Now everybody knows about them. Like, well, Brad predicts the future. I'm like, well, not really. They've been lopping heads off since 2009. They just didn't make the American news. And so I saw this story about a program, a company called NRO in Israel has a program called Pegasus, which can infect iPhones and Android phones and use them for surveillance devices. They can get all your contacts off of them. They can turn them on to listening devices. They can get the camera to turn on. And the unique thing about it was not required for you to do anything. Usually, like when Podesta had all his emails stolen, it's because he clicked on a link. You get sent a link and you click on it, that's a bad thing. They invented a way to do it without a click. They found what's called a 0-day vulnerability, meaning nobody knows it exists, and they can infect the phones. And they started doing that all over the place. And the Israeli company said, we'll only sell this to state-sanctioned good guys, basically is what they said. And so they sold it to the UAE, United Arab Emirates. And the UAE started hiring a bunch of guys from the NSA, Americans, to use this exploit. And they started targeting journalists that didn't like what UAE was saying. And some of those journalists were American citizens. So now you've got Americans from the NSA using a program from Israel, working for the UAE that are targeting American citizens.
Wow.
And I said, okay, that's a story.
Yeah.
Well, doing the research for that, I ran across the huge problem with ransomware. With the Colonial Pipeline attack, the meatpacking attack, they literally shut down the country of Costa Rica with a ransomware attack, or hitting hospitals where you have to pay the ransom or your patients are going to die.
Yep.
And it's a huge problem. And so I shifted from the NRO story to the ransomware story. The NRO software is in there, but it's just now a bit player. And the rest of it is this ransomware problem set, which is what I use for Devil's Ransom.
You know, I have to say, I love your website. It's very informative. Everybody should check it out. Lainey, if you could put it in the chat. I should have told you that before, because there, you know, your blog is, I love reading your blog, and you're sort of saying what, you know, in your one of your latest posts is sort of what you're saying right now. You were talking about Musk, and that was before.
I should blog more than I do. I only blog. My wife's always saying you haven't put a blog out in a while. Well, I only blog when something aggravates me. So when a lot of people start talking on TV about saying certain things that I think that's completely wrong, you don't understand what you're talking about. Everybody talks in bumper stickers.
Yeah.
And in fact, when I go on the news to talk about a various thing, when Korea was going crazy with the nuclear arms stuff, and they said, we want you to come on and talk, and I'd say, okay, I will, but I don't do bumper stickers. If you want me on, I'm going to need to explain what's going on here, because I can't just say North Korea bad. You know, it doesn't work that way. And so I mean, they are bad, don't get me wrong, but there's more nuance to it than what's going on. And so now I blog when something aggravates me, and Elon Musk aggravated me in my latest blog, so I blogged about it.
Yeah, and that was actually on October 15th. So that was not about the purchase. Well, anyway, you all can go and read.
No, it has nothing to do with the purchase of Twitter.
Right.
It has to do with him just wanting to make money.
Well, like they said, you're telling them stuff before it hits the news, and it's
Yeah, and then I realized the Devil's Ransom's got this billionaire who's got a space company, and I was like, oh, I told my wife, they're going to think I did that on purpose. And the two are completely dislocated. It wasn't until after I published that blog that I was like, wait a minute, the Devil's Ransom.
Listen, you're on. You write what you know, and your hunches are, are on the money, as are your books.
Yeah, I will say that when I write the books, what I really try to do, just as Taylor was saying, is that the characters drive the story. That is what drives the story. It is not the guns, the bullets, the cars, the fancy stuff. I mean, if there was, I could write a scene about a car bomb being built in a parking lot. And if it's going to go off in an empty parking lot, does anybody care? No, they care because it's going to harm a character that you've created and that the audience has become to know and love or whatever. And so one of the things I try to do when I'm writing the books is a lot of the times in Hollywood and things like that, it's always this one guy who's kept down. And if he only was allowed to use a drill bit on this bad guy's knee, then he'd save the day. And combat's not like that. It is absolutely a moral decay the minute you step into it. And it is not as easy as that. You never know if that guy's really bad. Now, speaking from truth, I mean, I've been there. You're interrogating a guy and you're like, he's kind of laughing and funny. And you're like, why does he want to kill everybody? He's kind of a funny guy. You know, I could have a beer with this guy if he drank. So he's Muslim, but he won't. But a lot of the times it's always that the hero does the right thing and it all ends up okay. When in fact, you make decisions in combat that are not the right decision. You don't do them for evil purposes, but it just happens. Bad things happen and you have to live with those consequences when that happens. And I try to capture that on the page. You know, sometimes things do not work out. Sometimes Pike makes a decision he's going to do A when he should have done B, and he's going to deal with that repercussion.
Well, you said that, am I muted? No, I'm okay. You had said that Pike evolves. I mean, obviously, you know, you've made him evolve and you've made his relationship evolve since book one. And you say that that he's evolved from the first book because he's a strategic, he's a strategic problem solver under stress.
Yes.
That's what makes him so good, or how he has become so good. And I thought that was very interesting. And you know, again, you're writing from your experience. That is why these books are all bestsellers, because they ring so true, because they are true.
But you have to come back from that. So he's going to make a problem, for instance, in Devil's Ransom. He makes some decisions, which are basically delayed decisions. Do we want to hit this house? No. Let's watch the house for a day and see before we stick our necks out too far. Let's watch the house for a day. Well, the reader knows that everybody in that house is dead and the bad guys have gone. And giving the bad guys a day to go somewhere else is going to make it that much harder to stop them. But that's a decision he makes. It's we're going to do A, B, C, and D, and this is how we're going to do it. And then when he finds out he made a mistake, you know, he's like, oh no, now we've really got to go find these guys. And the hardest thing about writing these stories is in the real world, like if you're driving a car and you're looking at your phone and somebody swerves in your lane, you get in a wreck. And that sets a trajectory of what's going to happen in your life. In a book, you have to describe the one thing Pike did and why he did not do 9,000 other things. So if I had a scene in a book where somebody ran into Pike and that caused the plot to go forward, it would be, that's just ridiculous. I mean, he didn't have to solve that problem. All he did was get hit by a car. That's just so convenient. So in the real world, convenient stuff happens all the time that you don't realize. In my books, I have to literally walk through, even in a gunfight, inside a room. So I have a scene where, in fact, it's in the Devil's Ransom. I actually, here's a spoiler. Don't tell anybody I said this.
Okay.
So Pike and Brett and Knuckles go into this house. And they are going to rescue a guy from Afghanistan. And they do. It's a great scene. And then as I reread it, I was like, why on earth did they go in there without any weapons? Because it's a big hand-to-hand scene, big fight scene. And I was like, that makes no sense. There is absolutely no way Pike Logan, Knuckles, and Brett are going to go into this house without a weapon. And so, and especially since Jennifer's on a roof shooting people already. And I was like, you got to rewrite that whole scene. But now I've got to rewrite it in the sense, well, if they have weapons, it's not going to be that sexy because they're just going to go in there and slaughter everybody. So how do I make this scene work where somehow or another they're going to lose a weapon? This is going to happen. That's going to happen. There's going to be some shooting, but it's still a suspenseful fight. And you have to, I reread that and reread it and say, okay, why did Knuckles go left instead of going right? If he'd gone right, he could have hit this guy. And so I have to make sure that when it's all said and done, every decision was made for the right reasons. Even if the reason is wrong, it was made for that reason.
Right. Well, they're human. Right.
But you'll get emails to just say, I would have figured this out. I'll give you an example. So for Days of Rage, I did all this research on small thermonuclear devices, which we're all talking about now, the tactical nukes. We used to have them. SATMs, we call them, special atomic demolition munitions, and green teams were supposed to free fall in with these things about the size of a suitcase. They were going to leave them at dams and things like that. And that's the whole plot. Well, after reading all the stuff about our testing of these things, if a thermonuclear device goes off on the ground, it creates enormous fallout and mess. But you can do it in the air and it doesn't really cause much at all. In fact, you can see videos from the 50s where these guys are looking up with goggles and they blow a nuclear bomb up in the air and it doesn't really do anything. So I had to have the bomb go off in the air, and I did that. But I failed to explain why it had to go off in the air. So now I get emails, why did Pike jump out of the plane? Why didn't he just push out the bomb out of the plane? And I'm like, man, I really should have wrote about the fact that that thing hits the ground. It's going to be a mess.
Yeah, that was another interesting thing that you talked about. People writing to you about, their own sort of take on things, or like, oh, what was the Chevrolet Oldsmobile?
Yeah.
And, I don't know. I just love that people's pace. They care, and they have their things, and they're not afraid to speak up either. So we have a couple of questions, and then we'll bring Taylor more back. But so if you could, we talked about this before, and if you're speaking to a librarian who, say a new librarian who is trying to, catch up, and they've not yet familiarized themselves with Pike Logan, tell us what you would want librarians to share with patrons as far as what they will get. What's going to be the takeaway? What are some of the things about your books that will appeal to a wide variety of readers?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I'll say that all the books do stand alone. I get asked that question all the time. Can I pick up book 17 without reading book 16? And you most certainly can. The only thing I'll caution is you might get some spoilers because the universe goes this way. And so in book 17, they're going to talk about something that happened in book 16, has nothing to do with the plot. But then when you read book 16, you may go, I think I know what's going to happen here. They talk about in book 17. Right. Had nothing to do with the plot. But I would go back to what I said before. The books themselves, while they are military thrillers, and there is, all the technical accuracy and things like that, and geopolitics are in there, and the history's in there, it's the characters that matter the most. You have to care about the characters, and I work very, very hard to make sure that's true. They're fully fleshed out characters and everything. And it's on the bad guy side too. I have never met Dr. Evil. You've got to believe that the guy who's doing the bad stuff, he's doing it for a reason. Might be money, might be ego, might be whatever. But he has a reason he's doing it. Very, very rarely is you've got, Jeffrey Dahmer and John Wayne Gacy, but most of the bad actors in the world are not Jeffrey Dahmer and John Wayne Gacy. They're doing it because they have some reason they think they're doing it. And in this case, for the Devil's Ransom, it starts out with money, but then it morphs into something else. These guys are thinking they're just going to make money, and they realize that, we've bitten off more than we can chew. Now it becomes survival. Well, if I don't keep doing this, they're all going to kill me. And you've got to make sure those characters are something that the reader can understand. It's not just some Dr. Evil sitting there. It's a guy who thinks he's doing the right thing when he's not. Yeah.
It's a fascinating, at the top of this conversation, that is just a fascinating hook. And the research, as Lainey said, Lainey always says, if I learn something from a book, I win. I'm on top. And your books educate. They educate and they entertain. And you've got this great relationship with Pike and Jennifer, and how they first, are together, and now their relationship evolves. So I don't know. I just think that's
a funny story. So I had in book 3, which I didn't think I'd have one book published, much less 3. The reviewer read it as the first book he read was book 3. And he said that, he's only got Jennifer in there because he's trying to get the female reader. And I was like, man, that guy gives me a lot of credit. He actually thought that I'm smart enough to design a character that's going to, I'm going to get this niche, and I'm going to get that niche, and I'm going to get this niche. I was like, no, Jennifer's been there from day one. Was created in my head before I put pen to paper from One Rough Man.
That's so cool. Okay, 2 quick questions. Jennifer Winberry says, is there a genre or a book you read that would surprise us?
Yeah, I think that my favorite book of all time is Watership Down. People
Oh,
laugh
interesting.
when I say that, but that's my favorite book of all time. In fact, I'm afraid to read it now as an adult because I'm afraid it won't hold up.
Yeah.
It's my favorite book.
That's always the
Oh, and I've
case.
read just about every genre. I went through a Ray Bradbury phase. I went through a Stephen King phase. I went through all the phases except for romance. I read romance novels when I was in Iraq. The only thing left on the shelves were romance novels. So I read those too.
You are a voracious reader.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
That.
that's wonderful. Yeah, don't read it again because you're right. It would probably hold up, but what if it doesn't? Then you'll be like, oh. Lainey, you have a question as well?
Yeah, so I have a question for Maureen Roberts. How did the pandemic affect your writing, and will you incorporate that time in future novels, which we've spoken about?
Yeah. So we talked about this the last time I was on. So it really did affect my writing. So the very first time, this was American Trader 2 books ago, and I went to Taiwan and Australia and did the research, came home to write the book. And in January, we got hit with a pandemic. And then I was like, now what do I do? The book was due in March, and I'm like, do I include the pandemic? I mean, current events, they're current. What do I do?
Mhm.
So I punted for that one and just said, I'm going to set this book in January 2020 when the Taiwanese elections were going on, which is what the book was about anyway. Instead of setting it in March, I set it in January. And the main reason is because we talked about before, I was in the Shinlin night market where there's 1,000 people there. They're all shopping and doing stuff in Taiwan. Well, now there's 0 people there. I had a surveillance scene in Botanical Gardens in Sydney that ends up at the Opera House, which when you're doing surveillance, you've got to have a crowd of people you can blend in with while you're following the bad guy. Well, now there are only 2 people on the street, or Pike and the bad guy. I mean, that's not going to work. So I punted on that one. Well, then the next book I was writing, I was like, now what are you going to do? And you've got to kind of prognosticate, how's this pandemic going to go? And so I said, okay, I think it's going to get easier, but we're still going to have issues. We're still going to have masks and that kind of stuff. And that's exactly what happened. And like I said earlier, some of that's good for a thriller writer because if everybody's wearing a mask, if I put on a mask and walk inside a bank right now, everybody's like, he's a bank robber. Well, during COVID, it's like, he's just a COVID guy. And so if I have a mask on with sunglasses and a hat, no facial recognition can do anything to me. And when I write scenes with all the surveillance technology that's around the world, if Pike wants to take somebody down, he can do it now. They'll know the action happened, but they're not going to identify him because he's dressed like everybody else on the street. And so I used it a little bit. I didn't dwell on it. In fact, when I would do my book talk speech for that book, End of Days, the last one that came out, I would say, this isn't a pandemic book, but you're going to read about the pandemic because it's hard to get a flight. It's hard. Some places required you to wear a mask. Some places wouldn't let you in. And I just had to incorporate that in the book.
It's amazing. It's so strange to, once there are climate disasters. There are, we talked about that too, these terrible things that happen with fires and hurricanes and earthquakes. And then you move on. But yeah, it's really, really interesting. We could talk to you for forever, as we could talk to Taylor for forever. But we should bring Taylor back and
Coming in.
he's writing a song. No, he's not. Hi, Taylor.
Hey, let me get off my I was watching on another thing there. So here we go.
It's all right. That's all right. Oh man, this was so great. So interesting, fascinating, compelling. I loved it. Lainey, wasn't this fun?
I am so intrigued by both of your backgrounds and how you write, and I could stay on.
Well, I have a question. So, Taylor, where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Texas, in Navasota.
Northwest Houston. Where?
Yeah, closer Navasota.
Yeah, I'm from Conroe.
Oh, Conroe. Yeah, I was thinking Huntsville, Conroe. That's right. Yeah. So we're really neighbors.
Yeah, absolutely. When you said Northwest Houston, I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny, forever, my whole life, you know where Navasota is, but I'll tell people I'm from Navasota and they'll go, yep, Nacogdoches, I know where that is. I'm like, no, Navasota, it's a whole different place, but I'm glad to hear you know where it is.
Yeah, I just want to get that question out.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah, we've had some really neat questions and comments in here. Thank you, librarians, for joining us. This is a real honor, truly, to have both of you with us today, for all that you've done before putting pen to paper and then after. So we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about your books. So, as I said, Lainey and I, we could talk to you for forever, but the hour flew. And so again, Brad Taylor's book, Devil's Ransom, goes on sale January 24th, 2023. And Taylor Moore's book, Flashpoint, goes on sale in August of 2023. So a bit more time for that to be available, but it will be. And as soon as it is, we'll put that up for folks to download and read. Brad's can be downloaded now. Don't forget to check out Taylor Moore's Spotify list. Super cool. Brad, have you ever thought about doing something like that? A Spotify list?
Actually, I have done that. So there's a Pike Logan Spotify list that's out. It's not for each book. I just made a Pike Logan list that I put up for the book launch. We do a book launch in Charleston. Usually there's some place in Charleston that's actually in the book, and then I'll do the book launch at that place. And we have a Pike Logan Spotify list.
Okay, that's so cool.
Here are my keys typing because I'm trying to find it.
You did talk to Tavia. She's got the download to it.
Okay, cool.
That for everybody. Yeah.
Librarians, let us know if we can send the authors, if they're available, to either in person or virtually write to us, and we'll do everything we can, because as you can see, it's fascinating and there's no end to the questions that we can ask and what we can learn from Brad and from Taylor. Brad, Taylor, anything else you guys want to say to each other, to librarians, or if you're good, that's cool too.
No, just thank you for having me. This is a lot of fun. Thank you.
Yeah, same here. Thanks for having us. This was fun. And Brad, hopefully I'll see you again soon sometime, maybe Thriller Fest at least. So
Yeah.
Thank you both so much. Lainey, thanks. As always, this was fun. We do want to do a quick mention of next week, unless, Lainey, I'm forgetting anything else regarding Brad and Taylor.
No, I'll get the playlist. Thank you for telling us that. I agree with Virginia. I find them so atmospheric when reading. So thank you.
Yeah.
And we're good for a big reveal, I guess, Virginia, for next week.
Okay, so the big reveal for next week, Tuesday at 2:00 Eastern Standard Time, is that we will be joined by former Library Love Fest buddy, Chris Connolly, who is still at HarperCollins and is now assistant marketing manager for General Trade. But Chris is going to come back and he is going to join us and talk to us about the books that he's working on. So there he is. Make sure to come back on the 8th at 2:00. Lady, do we have a bunch of funny pictures of Chris? Look at all the stuff we made him do. No wonder he left.
I said he's always willing to scream about a good book from the rooftops there, as you can see.
He's a great guy. We love him. And so we're looking forward to having him back to talk to us about the books he's working on. So until then, thank you all for joining us today. Taylor Moore, Brad Taylor, thank you so much for your time with us today and for talking to us about your books and your writing and, all of your experience and how they've informed your books, which is absolutely phenomenal. What a gift.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Bye, all. Thank you.